The subcommittee is meeting today for the consideration of H.R. 7443, the Combating Transnational Repression Act, H.R. 7433, the Law Enforcement Support and Transnational Repression Hotline Act, and H.R. 7439, the Strengthening State and Local Efforts to Combat Transnational Repression Act. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7 Charlie, requests for recorded votes may be postponed. Without objection, the subcommittee will dispense with opening statements. Members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record, however. For the benefit of all members, by agreement between the chair and the ranking member, the subcommittee will shortly proceed to the en bloc consideration of the 3 noticed measures in order to expedite the markup. The chair understands that no amendments have been pre-filed with the clerk or are expected to be offered by either side, so en bloc consideration will allow members to freely debate all 3 bills focusing on transnational repression. Without objection, the subcommittee shall proceed to the en bloc consideration of said bills. Pursuant to notice and the previous order of the subcommittee, the chair calls up H.R. 7443, H.R. 7433, and H.R. 7439 en bloc. The bills were circulated in advance and printed copies are available. The clerk shall designate the bills.
H.R. 7433, offered by Mr. Pfluger.
Without objection, the reading of the bills are dispensed with and are considered read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself for the purpose of explaining the 3 bills. First, I want to thank the ranking member for his cooperation and coordination in preparing for this bipartisan markup, and it truly is an effort in bipartisanship based on a hearing that we previously had. In the 118th Congress, the Committee on Homeland Security has held multiple hearings to examine the threat of transnational repression in the United States, which has grown significantly in the last few years. The committee has heard testimony from victims of transnational repression, including but not limited to Masih Alinejad, Enes Kanter Freedom, and Dr. Bob Fu of my home district in Midland, Texas, all of whom have been egregiously targeted on U.S. soil for criticizing authoritarian regimes. Transnational repression is the act of a foreign government or an individual acting on behalf of a foreign government, targeting an individual or community in another country and using violence, assassinations, the threat of violence, digital threats, family intimidation, smear campaigns, or the manipulation of legal processes to harass and intimidate individuals that are critical of the nation acting as an aggressor. The Chinese Communist Party, the Iranian regime, and others have gone beyond their borders to silence their citizens and Americans who defend human rights and advocate for free speech. These hostile acts are a direct challenge to our nation's sovereignty and the rule of law. It's important that the Department of Homeland Security takes steps to recognize, assess, and help address this threat, thereby reducing risk to the people of the United States. One such way involves DHS's Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, which through its investigative authorities works at the federal, state, and works with federal, state, and local partners to deter, dismantle, and mitigate criminal enterprises and hostile foreign government actors engaged in transnational repression. One of the bills we're marking up today, H.R. 7443, is an important measure that would authorize a dedicated transnational repression office within DHS's Homeland Security Investigations to analyze and monitor the repression and related terrorism threats and require HSI to take actions to prevent these acts. This follows a recent report by the GAO published in October of 23 that found agency actions are needed to address harassment of dissidents and other tactics of transnational repression in the United States. H.R. 7433 amends the Homeland Security Act of 2002 to establish a transnational repression hotline and conduct a transnational repression public service announcement campaign. I'd like to thank Representative D'Esposito for his attention to this important matter and particularly appreciate the provisions requiring a law enforcement support hotline and an incredibly important public service awareness campaign educating the public on the issue of the threats and the resources available to the victims. I think it's especially critical now, given the operation of an illegal overseas police station of the Chinese Communist Party in New York City. According to the Justice Department, the CCP, through its repressive security apparatus, established a secret physical presence in New York City to monitor and intimidate dissidents and those critical of its government. And the CCP's actions go far beyond the bounds of acceptable nation-state conduct. Just last July, Representative D'Esposito and I visited and met with the heads of NYPD's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division to discuss a myriad of issues, including repression and the NYPD's work related to the Chinese government police stations within Manhattan. It is paramount that we decisively defend the freedoms of all of those living in our country from the threat of authoritarian repression. I also support the measure offered by the ranking member, Mr. Magaziner, and appreciate his bipartisan approach in working together with the majority. I'm proud to support Ranking Member Magaziner's measure today, H.R. 7439, to require the Secretary of Homeland Security to prioritize the strengthening of state and local law enforcement capabilities to combat transnational repression and related terrorism threats. And I'm also proud that this committee, I think, is leading the way when it comes to coming together to address an issue, to work in a bipartisan manner to help protect not just freedom of speech, but the safety and security of any American here on our soil. And I, at this point, now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Magaziner of Rhode Island, for the purpose of explaining his bill.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Pfluger, Representative D'Esposito, Representative Goldman, and the rest of the subcommittee for their bipartisanship and collaboration on this important issue. And I want to offer a warm welcome to our new colleague, Representative Tom Suozzi, who is no stranger to Congress, but is joining the CTI subcommittee for his first meeting. And I know we all look forward to working with you in the year to come. So thank you very much, Representative Suozzi. In America, we believe in free speech and open debate. Unfortunately, in many places around the world, those who dare to speak out are met with harassment, imprisonment, and violence. We saw a horrifying example of this just a couple weeks ago with the killing of Alexei Navalny, leader of the Russian opposition party, by the regime of Vladimir Putin. And as we've heard during this subcommittee's hearing on transnational repression last month, repressive governments are not content to target dissidents in their own countries, but also threaten those who are seeking safe harbor here in the United States as well. We heard from Enes Kanter Freedom about the Turkish government's campaign of transnational repression. And we heard from Dr. Bob Fu, founder and president of the China Aid Association, about the CCP's multifaceted transnational repression campaign. Last year in the full Homeland Security Committee, we heard the story of Mahsa Ahmadinejad, an Iranian journalist and women's rights activist who lives in the United States, about the brazen assassination plot she survived, launched by agents of the Iranian government. And from public reporting, we have heard chilling developments like the attempted assassination of a Sikh activist living in the United States at the direction of the Indian government, and the arrest of individuals in New York City charged with operating a secret police station at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party. These are just a few examples. During our subcommittee hearing, we learned from Freedom House, a research organization focused on transnational repression, that there were at least 854 direct physical incidents of transnational repression around the world from 2014 to 2022. Today, our subcommittee is taking action and sending a message to governments around the world, friend or foe alike. Do not target people with harassment and violence for exercising their free speech, especially not here in the United States. We will not tolerate it. Today, we are considering 3 important bills to help crack down on transnational repression in the United States. My bill, H.R. 7439, the Strengthening State and Local Efforts to Combat Transnational Repression Act, will ensure that state and local law enforcement get the training they need to identify, pursue, and investigate transnational repression in the communities that they serve. State and local law enforcement agencies are often the eyes and ears best suited to identify and disrupt transnational repression, but they need the training in order to do so. Under this bill, DHS will establish a transnational repression threat training program for state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement agencies, including through fusion centers. I want to thank Chairman Pfluger and Representatives D'Esposito and Goldman for co-sponsoring this bill. I am also proud to be an original co-sponsor of the other 2 bills being considered today. Chairman Pfluger's legislation ensures that diaspora communities in the United States are protected from oppressive governments abroad. It creates a new office within the National Security Division of Homeland Security Investigations to focus on analyzing and monitoring transnational repression and terrorism acts. Mr. D'Esposito's bill will give people who believe they are victims of transnational oppression a safe way to report their victimization to DHS through the hotline and public awareness campaign. These are all good bills, and I am proud to support them. Chairman, I'm happy to join you in this bipartisan effort to crack down on transnational repression. I thank you for your approach, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate throughout the remainder of the 118th Congress. Thank you all for your collaboration. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member and now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito, for the purpose of explaining his bill.
Well, thank you, Chairman Pfluger and Ranking Member Magaziner, for leading this subcommittee markup and for consideration of my bill, H.R. 7433, the Law Enforcement Support and Transnational Repression Hotline Act. I'd also, too, like to take this moment to welcome fellow Long Islander Tom Suozzi to the committee, and I know that this committee is 4 Long Island strong, and I think this markup today is a perfect example how us Long Islanders can work for the best interests of not only Long Island, but New York and the United States of America. As the chairman previously highlighted, we have seen multiple instances in the last few years where malign nations and their actors, like the Chinese Communist Party and Iran, and nations who are supposed to be our allies, like Turkey and India, conduct acts of transnational repression within our borders that are designed to target Americans and to suppress free speech. Our nation cannot allow any government to violate our sovereignty and challenge the rule of law. I'm proud to represent the diverse community that makes up New York's 4th Congressional District. As a retired NYPD detective and former councilman in the town of Hempstead, I know that the diverse communities in my district contribute greatly to the culture and welfare of the great Empire State. They should be able to live free of fear from persecution of foreign malign actors. I am proud to have introduced H.R. 7433, the Law Enforcement Support and Transnational Repression Hotline Act. This legislation instructs DHS to create a PSA campaign that is designed to educate communities on the threats posed by transnational repression. In addition, this bill establishes a hotline within the Department of Homeland Security for victims to step out of the shadows and reports instances of transnational repression. This legislation, along with the bills offered by Chairman Pfluger and Ranking Member Magaziner, are critical first steps in providing our communities with valuable tools to safeguard the American public and combat transnational repression. Again, I want to thank this committee for their hard work, Chairman, for your leadership, and with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Does any other member seek recognition? Recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Suozzi.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this warm greeting. Mr. Magaziner, thank you so much. Mr. Esposito, Mr. Crane, look forward to getting to know you. I'm intimately familiar with this issue. It's a very, very important issue, as I'm the former chairman and founder of the Uyghur Caucus. And I know many people who are part of the effort here in the United States of America to point out the forced labor camps and the other awful atrocities taking place in China to the Uyghurs. And they've all been victims of transnational repression. And we've tried to work with the FBI in the past, and that coordination is not an easy thing to accomplish. So I'm excited to hear that Homeland Security, under this bill, will have an opportunity to help these victims who are being persecuted in our country. So thank you very much for the good work that you do, and I'm excited to see the bipartisan nature of this committee. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any other members seeking recognition? I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege to highlight in the room that there are a couple of guests from the Midland, Odessa area, Mr. Jay Hendricks, his colleague Matthew from CBS 7, who have reported on this issue for many years with that of Dr. Bob Fu. And we thank them for being here. We thank you for your work of getting that story out, which has had an impact on what we're working on here. Are there any amendments to the bills? Hearing none, the question is on favorably reporting the bills H.R. 7443, H.R. 7433, and H.R. 7439 en bloc to the full committee without amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, motions to reconsider are laid on the table. Without objection, staff is authorized to make any required technical or conforming changes to reflect the actions of the subcommittee. This concludes the consideration of the bills noticed by the subcommittee for today. There being no further business and without objection, and With a massive thank you to both the minority and majority staff who have put a lot of work into this bipartisan effort, the subcommittee now stands adjourned.